The Platinum Imperial Hotel lobby existed in a world Daniel Porter could only glimpse from the margins. Crystal chandeliers threw fractured light across Italian marble floors so polished they reflected the designer shoes of guests who would never notice the man in the faded maintenance uniform kneeling beside the ornamental fountain. His weathered work boots, purchased second-hand 3 years ago, had been resold twice. The scuff marks told stories of 12-hour shifts spent crawling through ventilation ducts and mopping executive restrooms where a single toilet fixture cost more than his monthly rent. Daniel's calloused fingers traced the copper piping beneath the fountain's base, checking for the leak the front desk had reported that morning. His toolbox sat open beside him, organized with the precision of a man who couldn't afford to lose a single wrench. The fountain's gentle burbling provided white noise that almost masked the sharp click of heels on marble, the rustle of silk against silk, the low murmur of conversations conducted in the language of money and power. Beside him on the marble ledge, 8-year-old Sophia sat with her legs crossed, a hotel napkin spread across her lap. Her small fingers moved with practiced care, folding crisp white linen into precise creases. The paper crane taking shape under her nimble touch had become their ritual over the past 3 years, a private ceremony inherited from the mother neither of them could bear to forget. Sophia's tongue peeked out slightly as she concentrated, a habit that squeezed Daniel's heart every time he noticed it. Rachel had done the same thing when focused on her origami, back when cancer was just a word other people worried about, before 14 months of watching the woman he loved dissolve into something fragile and breakable. The crane took form under Sophia's fingers, each fold executed with the muscle memory Rachel had taught her daughter in those final lucid weeks. Daniel paused his work to watch, throat tight with the familiar ache that lived permanently in his chest these days. 3 years hadn't dulled it. Some mornings he woke expecting to find Rachel beside him, only to remember all over again that the bed would stay empty forever. Sophia completed the final fold and held up the white crane, examining it with critical 8-year-old eyes. Satisfied, she tucked it carefully into Daniel's shirt pocket, patting it twice through the worn fabric. "This one's special, Daddy. Extra protection today." The words emerged with absolute conviction, as if folded paper possessed genuine power to shield against whatever darkness waited in the world. Daniel had stopped questioning Sophia's faith in her origami guardians. If believing in paper cranes helped his daughter navigate life without a mother, he'd carry 1,000 of them. The hotel manager's voice cut through the lobby's ambient wealth like a knife through silk. Daniel didn't need to look up to know the man was addressing him. The tone carried that particular blend of condescension and irritation reserved for service workers who dared occupy spaces designed for their betters. "Sir, the service entrance is located in the basement. This area is reserved for guests. Perhaps I could direct you." Daniel rose slowly, wiping his hands on his work pants before meeting the manager's gaze. The man's tailored suit probably cost more than Daniel earned in 3 months. His name tag read Harrison in polished brass letters that gleamed under the chandelier light. "I'm here to repair the fountain leak. Work order signed last week. My daughter's with me because her after-school program was canceled." The words came out measured and calm, though Daniel's jaw tightened imperceptibly. Sophia had learned to read that particular tension in his face, the way his muscles contracted when he was forcing himself to remain civil in situations that demanded he swallow his dignity along with his pride. Harrison's expression shifted through several calculations, weighing the inconvenience of arguing against the hotel's need for functioning decorative features. His eyes flicked to Sophia with barely disguised distaste, as if the presence of a child in this cathedral of luxury constituted a health code violation. "We'll be out of your way shortly." Daniel kept his voice level, professional. 3 years of working maintenance at the Platinum Imperial had taught him the invisible rules that governed his existence in this building. Be useful, be quiet, be grateful they allow you to earn barely enough to survive. A couple at the nearby bar spoke just loudly enough for their voices to carry across the lobby, words wrapped in the casual cruelty of people who'd never worried about money in their lives. These service people bringing children to work, absolutely inappropriate. The woman's diamond bracelet caught the light as she gestured dismissively toward Daniel and Sophia. Standards have really declined. Sophia's shoulders hunched slightly, her small body instinctively making itself smaller. She'd learned early how the world treated people like them, learned that her father's uniform marked them both as belonging to a lower order of humanity in spaces like this. Daniel placed a protective hand on her shoulder, feeling her tense beneath his touch. 3 more hours until his shift ended. 3 more hours of being invisible while fixing things for people who would never see him as fully human. Ben home to their 1-bedroom apartment in the Bronx, where the water heater worked intermittently and the landlord's promises of repairs held exactly as much weight as Daniel's hopes for a better life. The elevator across the lobby opened with a soft chime. Daniel's attention shifted automatically, cataloging movement and faces with the instinct drilled into him during 5 years working hotel security before Rachel got sick and the medical bills forced him to take any job that offered health insurance. His gaze swept the arriving guests, noting posture and patterns, threats and anomalies. A woman stepped into the lobby, and something in the way she moved made Daniel's pulse quicken with recognition he couldn't quite place. She wore a simple black dress, nothing flashy, but the fabric moved like water across her frame. Her watch was expensive but functional, no jewelry to advertise wealth. Everything about her presentation suggested someone trying not to be noticed, which was precisely what made her noticeable to eyes trained to spot discrepancies. She paused near the concierge desk, her gaze moving across the lobby with methodical precision. Not a tourist admiring architecture, not a regular guest oriented to familiar surroundings. Someone searching. Someone looking for something specific. Sophia's small voice pulled Daniel's attention back to his daughter. She looks kind, not like the others. Daniel followed Sophia's gaze back to the woman in black. His daughter possessed an uncanny ability to read people, some inherited gift from Rachel, who'd always seemed to know exactly what someone needed before they asked. Sophia studied the stranger with solemn intensity, her expression thoughtful in ways that made Daniel's chest ache with how much his 8-year-old had already learned about judging character. The woman's path toward the hotel bar intersected with 3 security personnel, who materialized from the VIP section with coordinated precision. Daniel recognized the lead man immediately. Vincent Kane, head of security, moved with the casual authority of someone who'd spent decades enforcing rules and occasionally breaking them when convenient. Kane's hand touched the woman's elbow, subtle pressure guiding her toward the executive conference area. She recoiled slightly, a micro-expression of discomfort that most observers would miss. Kane's smile never wavered as he spoke, words too low for Daniel to catch, but body language clear enough. This wasn't a request. The woman tried to step away, polite but firm. Kane shifted to block her path, his 2 associates flanking her with practiced efficiency. The movement created a casual cage, 3 bodies positioned to prevent escape while maintaining the appearance of helpful hotel staff assisting a valued guest. Daniel's fingers tightened on his wrench. Every instinct honed during 5 years of security work screamed that something was wrong. The security cameras covering the VIP section had been repositioned earlier that morning, creating a blind spot. Not a malfunction. Deliberate. Sophia's hand found his, small fingers gripping tight. "I don't like how they're talking to that lady, Daddy." The words carried weight beyond their simplicity. Sophia had learned to trust her gut about people, learned that sometimes the men with badges and authority were exactly the ones you needed to fear most. Her eyes remained fixed on the scene unfolding near the bar, watching Kane's smile grow wider as the woman's discomfort became more evident. Daniel's jaw tightened, doing that thing Sophia had learned to recognize as fear masked by determination. He had a daughter to protect, a job he couldn't afford to lose, $58 in his wallet standing between them and eviction. Getting involved would be stupid, dangerous, Exactly the kind of reckless heroism that ended with men like him disappearing into the city's indifferent machinery. Rachel's voice whispered through his memory, words she'd spoken in those final, clear weeks before the morphine took her permanently away. "Promise me you won't let the world make you hard, Daniel. Don't let grief close you off. Sophia needs to see that good men still exist." The woman's voice carried across the lobby now, raised just enough to project authority without causing a scene. "I appreciate the offer, but I'm here on business. I need to leave now." Kane's response held false joviality stretched thin over something darker. "Business can wait. We're celebrating a special acquisition tonight. Someone with your expertise should join us." "My employer would be very interested in meeting you." The other two security men positioned themselves to block sightlines from the front desk, creating privacy for whatever was about to happen. Daniel had seen this choreography before, back when he'd worn a security uniform instead of maintenance coveralls. The setup for situations that guests would later struggle to explain to police, who rarely believed civilians over hotel personnel with institutional backing. Sophia's grip on his hand tightened further. Her other hand reached into the small backpack she carried everywhere, producing another napkin. She began folding without looking down, fingers moving through the familiar pattern with muscle memory, while her eyes stayed locked on Kane and his prey. "I need to use the restroom." The words emerged in that specific tone they'd developed over 3 years of navigating hostile territory together. Not actually asking permission, telling Daniel she could manage alone, giving him space to handle whatever situation had captured his attention. Their private code for trust and necessity. "Be right back, Princess. Stay here. Keep folding. If anyone bothers you, go straight to the front desk and tell them to call me." He brushed her hair gently, their signal that this was serious, that she needed to be ready to run if things went wrong. Sophia nodded solemnly, understanding passing between them in that wordless way they'd developed after Rachel's death left them alone against the world. Daniel stood, adjusting his work belt. To casual observers, he was simply a maintenance worker heading to complete his assigned tasks. Nothing worth noticing. He'd perfected the art of being forgettable, a survival tactic that had served him well in this building where men like him existed only as functions, not people. The woman tried again to step around Kane, more forceful now. Kane shifted smoothly to block her, his hand finding her lower back with proprietary familiarity, no longer pretending this was friendly assistance. The security cameras remained pointed away, blind to whatever happened in the pocket of space Kane had created. Daniel's work boots made no sound on the marble as he approached. Years of security training had taught him to move without announcing himself, to close distance before targets registered threat. His heart hammered against his ribs, adrenaline sharpening his senses even as his rational mind cataloged all the ways this could destroy him. $58, one-bedroom apartment. Daughter with asthma medication that cost $280 monthly when insurance deigned to cover it. Job that barely kept them fed but couldn't be risked because finding another position that offered benefits was like winning a lottery he'd never been lucky enough to play. He cleared his throat, voice projected with enough authority to cut through Kane's ongoing monologue about special acquisitions and employer interest. "Excuse me, sir. Need to check the fire sprinkler system in this section. Building code requirement." Kane turned, irritation flashing across his face before recognition settled into something closer to contempt. His eyes performed a quick assessment, noting Daniel's worn uniform and calloused hands. Not worth his concern. Definitely not a threat. "This will have to wait. We're conducting important business." The woman seized the momentary distraction, attempting to slip past Kane's guard. He moved to block her again with practiced ease, all pretense of courtesy evaporating from his expression. "I'm afraid I need to insist, Miss Winters. My employer has specifically asked to meet you. It would be better for everyone if you cooperated." The name landed like a physical blow. Winters. As in Winters Security Corporation, the private military contractor that had provided protection services to half the Fortune 500 companies and most major hotels in New York. Daniel had interviewed with them once, back when he was trying to move up from hotel security to something better paid. They'd turned him down. Overqualified for grunt work, underqualified for anything requiring connections or advanced training. Which meant this woman wasn't just wealthy. She came from power, the kind that moved through the world expecting doors to open and obstacles to dissolve. The kind that made men like Cain nervous enough to trap her in blind spots and use words like employer and insist with weights that promised violence. The lady said she's leaving. Daniel kept his voice neutral, statement of fact rather than challenge. Years of de-escalating situations between drunk guests and exhausted staff had taught him the power of calm refusal wrapped in professional courtesy. Cain's attention fully shifted to Daniel now, reassessing with new calculation. Something in Daniel's stillness apparently triggered recognition that this wasn't just another maintenance worker easily dismissed. Wrong place, maintenance man. This doesn't concern you. Cain's hand moved fractionally toward his jacket, subtle suggestion of a weapon without explicitly revealing one. The two flanking security men adjusted their positioning, creating a triangle that could collapse into violence with practiced efficiency. Sophia watched from across the lobby, another napkin already transforming into a crane under her flying fingers. Daniel could feel his daughter's eyes on him, could sense her holding her breath while pretending to be absorbed in her origami. The woman's eyes met Daniel's briefly, calculation flashing across her features. She was measuring him, assessing whether he represented help or just another complication. Fair question. Daniel was asking himself the same thing. I just need to do my job, sir. Fire safety regulations. You can verify with the city office if needed. Cain's jaw tightened, patience eroding. His hand touched Daniel's chest, applying firm pressure, not quite a shove, but unmistakable assertion of dominance. Wrong man, buddy. Wrong place, wrong time. This doesn't concern you. The phrase, wrong man, echoed strange in Daniel's ears, weighted with something beyond its surface meaning. Cain's eyes held the flat calculation of someone deciding whether violence was worth the witness exposure. Several hotel guests had turned to watch now, phones raised, recording the confrontation with the casual cruelty of people treating human drama as entertainment. Daniel absorbed the push without yielding ground. 5 years of security work had taught him how to stand, how to project calm authority even when his pulse hammered and sweat slicked his palms. Cain was trained, probably ex-military or police, definitely dangerous. The two flanking guards carried themselves with similar competence. But Daniel had spent 5 years learning to read violence before it happened, to see the micro-expressions and weight shifts that telegraphed intent. Cain was calculating costs, weighing exposure against necessity. The phones recording them changed that calculation significantly. The woman used the moment of distraction to step firmly away from Cain's perimeter, positioning herself closer to Daniel. Her movement was deliberate, creating alignment that forced Cain to back down or escalate in front of witnesses. Thank you for your concern. I would appreciate an escort to my car. Her voice carried corporate authority, the kind that expected compliance without question. Cain's expression darkened, recognizing the situation slipping from his control. More guests were watching now, murmuring to each other, phones capturing every second. Cain signaled to his associates with subtle gesture. They moved to flank Daniel on both sides, creating the same cage they'd built around the woman. The threat was clear. Back off or face consequences. Hotel manager Harrison appeared suddenly, drawn by the gathering attention. His eyes widened, taking in the scene, calculations visible across his face as he weighed property liability against staff authority. Is there a problem here? His nervous glance between Cain and Daniel revealed where his loyalties lay, but the presence of recording phones complicated his usual instinct to defer to security. Cain smiled tightly, professional mask sliding back into place. No problem. Just explaining to our maintenance staff that this area is currently reserved for a private function. Ms. Winters is joining us for a business discussion. The woman's voice cut through the false civility. I've declined the invitation and I'm leaving now. Her tone brooked no argument. corporate decisiveness that had probably ended boardroom debates and resolved million-dollar negotiations. But Kane had stopped listening. His eyes were on Daniel, assessing threat level and calculating response. Daniel watched one of the flanking guards reach toward his arm, intending to move him aside with force wrapped in professional courtesy. The movement telegraphed itself through weight shift and shoulder rotation, giving Daniel 2 seconds of warning. Training took over before conscious thought. Daniel shifted his weight, redirecting the guard's momentum with minimal contact, stepping aside smoothly. The guard stumbled forward, thrown off balance but unhurt. To casual observers, it looked like the man had simply tripped. Only trained eyes would recognize the technique, the economy of motion that suggested far more capability than a maintenance worker should possess. A murmur rippled through the watching crowd. Phones captured the moment, uploading to social media platforms where algorithms would decide whether this qualified as viral content or just another forgettable confrontation in a city full of daily drama. Kane's face flushed with anger, calculation giving way to bruised pride. He nodded sharply to his second associate, who approached Daniel with more aggressive intent. No pretense of courtesy now, just force waiting to be applied. The woman's hand found Daniel's elbow, light touch that communicated urgency without desperation. "Please, just help me leave." 3 words that carried weight beyond their simplicity. A request from someone who'd probably never needed to ask for help in her life. Someone whose last name opened doors and whose bank account solved problems. Reduced now to asking a maintenance worker for assistance against hotel security in the building her family's company probably helped protect. Daniel picked up a glass of water from a nearby table, holding it out toward the approaching guard as if offering a drink. The unexpected gesture caused the man to hesitate, trained responses derailed by absurdity. Daniel used that moment to step past him, positioning himself beside the woman. Sophia had moved to the front desk without him noticing, following their emergency protocol perfectly. She stood watching, small hands clutching her backpack full of paper cranes, eyes wide but not fearful. Trusting him to handle this, trusting that her daddy would keep his promises to the mommy she barely remembered anymore. Kane stepped forward himself, done delegating to subordinates who'd proven inadequate. His hand reached inside his jacket, movement designed to imply a weapon without explicitly revealing one. The threat was clear enough. Daniel had crossed a line, made himself a problem that needed solving. Harrison intervened suddenly, anxiety overriding his usual deference to security authority. "Sir, perhaps we should call the police to resolve this matter?" His nervous glance at Kane revealed fear beneath the suggestion. Recognition that he'd just proposed bringing external oversight to whatever arrangement usually governs situations like this. Kane's hand emerged empty from his jacket, calculation returning as he reconsidered escalation. The phones recording them made violence messy, created liability that would generate questions he probably couldn't answer satisfactorily. His eyes narrowed, reassessing Daniel with new wariness. "Fine. Ms. Winters is free to leave. For now." He let the pause stretch before adding weight to his next words. "But our employer will be very disappointed to have missed you. There were so many things to discuss." The threat barely disguised itself behind corporate language. This wasn't over. Kane had simply chosen to postpone rather than abandon whatever he'd been instructed to accomplish. Daniel maintained his position between Kane and the woman, body language making clear he intended to escort her out. Every muscle screamed at him to run, to grab Sophia and disappear before consequences he couldn't afford caught up with them. Kane stepped close enough that his words reached Daniel's ears alone, quiet and precise. "You made a serious mistake today, whoever you are. I don't know what your game is, but you just put yourself on our radar. Wrong man, wrong place, wrong time, buddy. Remember that when they come looking." The phrase "wrong man" echoed again, weighted with meaning Daniel couldn't parse. Kane's eyes held flat promise of violence, deferred, but not forgotten. Daniel had marked himself, become visible in ways that endangered everything he'd worked to build since Rachel's death left him scrambling to survive. The woman moved toward the exit with swift confidence, composure intact despite the confrontation. Daniel gestured for Sophia to join them, unwilling to leave his daughter alone, even for the seconds it would take to reach the street. She hurried over, paper cranes clutched tightly, and slipped her small hand into his. They walked through the Platinum Imperial's glass doors into afternoon sunlight that felt harsh after the lobby's carefully controlled lighting. The city noise hit them like a wave, taxis honking and construction crews shouting, and the general chaos of Manhattan doing what Manhattan did best. A black SUV with tinted windows idled at the curb, engine running. Daniel's security instincts screamed warning. He placed himself between the vehicle and both Sophia and the woman, scanning for threats, calculating escape routes. The SUV pulled slowly away from the curb, passing close enough that Daniel could see the driver's face in profile. Young, professional, eyes tracking them with predatory interest. Surveillance pass, not immediate threat, but confirmation that Kane's promises hadn't been empty. The woman turned to face Daniel, professional demeanor cracking slightly to reveal genuine relief. "Thank you for intervening. That could have gone very badly." Daniel nodded, attention split between her gratitude and monitoring their surroundings for follow-up threats. The SUV had turned the corner, but might circle back. Kane could be watching from hotel security cameras. They needed to move, get distance, disappear into the city's anonymous crowds. Sophia tugged at his hand, voice quiet but insistent. "She needs help, Daddy, like the lady at the grocery store last month. We helped her, remember?" The reference pulled Daniel's attention fully to his daughter. Last month, they'd witnessed a woman being harassed by her ex-boyfriend in the parking lot. Daniel had intervened despite the risk, despite the danger, despite every rational calculation that said getting involved was stupid. Because Sophia was watching. The woman studied Daniel with new intensity, clearly reassessing him beyond the maintenance uniform and work boots. "You're not really just maintenance, are you? The way you moved, the way you read the situation, that's not typical civilian awareness." Fair observation. Daniel had hoped his skills would stay hidden, that he could remain invisible in the maintenance role that paid just enough to keep them housed and fed. But Kane had already marked him. The SUV surveillance confirmed he'd become a problem requiring attention. "Former hotel security. 5 years before I needed a job with better health insurance." The explanation was true enough without revealing the desperate circumstances that had forced the transition. Rachel's medical bills, the mounting debt, the choice between advancement and survival. Sophia produced another paper crane from her backpack, this one folded from blue napkin instead of white. She held it out to the woman with solemn ceremony. "For protection, everyone needs one." The woman accepted the offering with appropriate gravity, recognizing that this wasn't a child's casual gift, but something weighted with significance. She examined the crane carefully before tucking it into her purse. "Thank you. I think I might need it." Her gaze returned to Daniel, questions evident in her expression. Professional curiosity mixed with something else. Recognition, perhaps, of someone operating outside their expected parameters. "I can't just walk away. I need to talk to you somewhere safe. It's important." Daniel hesitated, every instinct screaming at him to refuse, to grab Sophia and run, to disappear into the city before whatever Kane had planned could catch up with him. Getting involved would risk everything: his job, their safety, the fragile stability he'd fought 3 years to build from the ruins of Rachel's death. But the black SUV had been real. Kane's threats had been explicit. Daniel had already crossed the threshold from invisible to marked. Refusing to hear what this woman needed to say wouldn't erase that reality. Sophia's voice cut through his internal debate. "The pattern still holds, Daddy. The cranes are working. But we need to listen." Daniel studied his daughter, seeing Rachel's features overlaid on Sophia's face, seeing the woman he'd loved reflected in the child whose enhanced perception had proven disturbingly accurate since Rachel's death. 3 years he'd been alone with Sophia, two parents compressed into one while trying to provide everything his daughter needed on poverty wages and diminishing hope. He calculated quickly. Kane would be watching his apartment. The hotel was compromised. They needed neutral ground where Daniel could hear whatever this woman needed to say while maintaining exit options if things went wrong. Riverside Park, near the boathouse. 20 minutes. If you see any vehicles from the hotel, don't stop. Just drive past. The woman nodded, relief visible beneath her professional composure. Thank you. I promise this is important. She moved toward a modest sedan parked near the hotel's side entrance, nothing flashy or ostentatious. Strange choice for someone whose last name commanded corporate empires. Everything about her suggested someone trying to hide in plain sight, which made Daniel's instincts scream louder about exactly what kind of situation he'd stumbled into. He hurried Sophia toward their 15-year-old Jeep, parked 3 blocks away in the public lot where monthly fees consumed too much of his paycheck. He lifted her into the passenger seat, buckling her in with practiced efficiency while scanning the street for surveillance. Are we in danger, Daddy? Sophia's voice carried mature concern that no 8-year-old should need to possess. She'd learned too young that the world could be cruel, that safety was never guaranteed, that her father's vigilance was all that stood between her and the chaos that consumed people without resources or protection. Daniel considered lying, offering false comfort that would insult her intelligence and break the honesty they'd maintained since Rachel's death. He'd promised never to treat Sophia like she was too young to understand truth, even when truth was frightening. I don't think so, Princess. But we need to be careful. Those men weren't nice people. Sophia nodded, accepting his assessment. She pulled another napkin from her backpack, fingers moving through familiar folds while her eyes tracked their surroundings with wariness that tightened Daniel's chest. I could tell. That's why I made extra cranes. I started this morning. I had a feeling. The statement should have sounded absurd. Childish, magical thinking with no basis in reality. But Sophia's feelings had proven disturbingly accurate since Rachel's death. The morning Rachel stopped responding to treatment, Sophia had spent hours folding black cranes. The day their landlord tried to evict them illegally, Sophia had placed red cranes on every doorframe. Her daughter's intuition operated on frequencies Daniel couldn't access. He started the Jeep, taking a circuitous route toward Riverside Park while checking mirrors constantly for pursuit. The black SUV didn't reappear, but Daniel's security training kept his shoulders tight and jaw clenched. Kane had resources. Professional surveillance wouldn't announce itself with obvious following. Traffic crawled through Manhattan's perpetual congestion, giving Daniel too much time to think about consequences. He'd kept his head down for 3 years, stayed invisible, played by rules designed to keep men like him contained and compliant. One afternoon of doing the right thing had shattered that carefully maintained anonymity. Riverside Park emerged through the Jeep's windshield, sprawling green space offering both visibility and multiple exit routes. Daniel parked near the boathouse as promised, choosing a spot that allowed him to monitor approaching vehicles while maintaining quick access to the street. Sophia gathered her backpack, now stuffed with dozens of paper cranes in multiple colors. Her small face carried determination beyond her years, recognition that whatever came next would require the protection her origami could provide. The pattern still holds, Daddy. We just need to trust it. Daniel helped her from the Jeep, keeping her hand firmly in his as they walked toward the designated meeting spot. The sedan he'd watched the woman enter earlier pulled into the parking area, making a complete circuit before choosing a space near the main path. Good situational awareness. Cautious without being paranoid. The woman emerged after several minutes, scanning the surroundings before finally walking toward them. Her corporate composure had softened slightly, revealing strain beneath the professional exterior. Whatever had happened at the hotel had rattled her more than she'd initially shown. Sophia spotted her first, producing another colorful crane from seemingly infinite supply. This one's even stronger. Special folding technique. The woman accepted the second crane with appropriate seriousness, recognizing that these weren't casual gifts, but talismans, weighted with meaning only Sophia fully understood. Thank you. I'm going to need all the protection I can get. She turned her attention to Daniel, professional mask slipping further to reveal genuine concern. I need to tell you something that's going to sound unusual, but after what happened at the hotel, I think you'll understand. My name is Natalie Winters. I'm not just some random guest who needed help. She paused, gathering herself before continuing. I'm the daughter of Richard Winters, Winters Security Corporation, and I have been investigating illegal operations at the Platinum Imperial Hotel for the past 3 months. Vincent Kane recognized me. That's why he was trying to prevent me from leaving. What you just did back there? You didn't just help a stranger. You interfered with something dangerous. Something that's going to put you directly in their crosshairs. The words hung in the afternoon air, while Daniel processed implications that multiplied with each passing second. Winters Security Corporation. Illegal operations. Kane's explicit threats suddenly contextualized into something far worse than simple intimidation. Sophia looked between the adults, young face serious as she processed information children shouldn't need to understand. Is this about the nightmares, Daddy? The ones that make you check the doors 3 times every night? The question pierced through Daniel's tactical assessment, exposing vulnerabilities he'd hoped remained hidden from his daughter. But Sophia saw everything, understood more than he'd ever intended to share. His nightmares weren't about Kane or current threats. They were older, deeper, rooted in the 5 years he'd spent watching humanity's casual cruelties play out in hotel corridors while wearing a security uniform that marked him as complicit. Natalie's expression shifted, recognition dawning. You've seen things. Working security? Things that didn't make sense. Things that made you realize the hotel wasn't just running normal operations. Not a question. An assessment that hit too close to truth Daniel had spent 3 years trying to forget. He'd left hotel security not just for health insurance, but because continuing meant becoming the kind of man who looked away when guests disappeared into executive suites and emerged hours later traumatized and broken. Natalie continued, urgency replacing her earlier caution. Kane isn't just corrupt. He's part of a network. Money laundering through the hotel. Possibly worse, human trafficking, blackmail operations. My father's company provided security for the Platinum Imperial 8 years ago. We uncovered evidence of criminal activity and testified against several employees. Kane was a police detective then. He lost his job, his pension, everything because of Winters Security's testimony. This is personal for him. And now you're caught in it. Sophia tugged at Daniel's hand, small voice cutting through the expanding implications. Miss Natalie needs help catching bad guys. That's what Daddy does. He helps people. The simple faith in her words squeezed Daniel's heart. His 8-year-old daughter believed her father was a hero, believed that paper cranes and good intentions could protect against men like Kane, who controlled systems designed to crush people exactly like them. Daniel met Natalie's gaze, seeing past the corporate polish to genuine fear beneath. What exactly are you asking me to do? Natalie's question hung unanswered in the park's late afternoon stillness. Daniel studied her face, reading the tension around her eyes, the way her hands had unconsciously clenched into fists. Fear dressed in corporate composure, desperation wrapped in professional vocabulary. I'm not asking you to do anything yet. I'm warning you. Kane called you wrong man. That's not casual phrasing. It's operational terminology, code language used in security and law enforcement circles to designate someone marked for elimination. The words landed with surgical precision, cutting through Daniel's already fraying sense of safety. Sophia's grip on his hand tightened, her young mind processing implications that no child should have to calculate. You're saying they're going to kill me? Daniel kept his voice level, refusing to let fear bleed into words where Sophia could hear it amplified. His daughter had already lost her mother to an enemy she couldn't fight. Cancer had taught Sophia that death came for good people, without warning or mercy. Learning that human malice could be equally indiscriminate would shatter something Daniel wasn't sure how to repair. Natalie's expression softened fractionally, recognition passing across her features that she was talking to a father first, a potential asset second. I'm saying Kane runs background checks on anyone who interferes with his operations. He'll discover you worked hotel security for 5 years before transitioning to maintenance. He'll find the gap in your employment history when Rachel was sick. He'll piece together that you're vulnerable, desperate, alone except for your daughter. And he'll use that information to either neutralize you as a threat or leverage you into silence. The analysis was clinically accurate, stripping away any illusion Daniel had maintained about his anonymity. 3 years of keeping his head down, staying invisible, building a life from the wreckage of Rachel's death. Kane would dismantle all of it in whatever time it took to run a comprehensive background check. Sophia produced her small notebook from the backpack, the one Rachel had given her for sketching. Her fingers moved across the page with focused intensity, drawing lines and symbols that looked disturbingly like tactical positioning markers. Daniel had never taught her security concepts, never shared details of his previous work. Yet his daughter was creating a map that captured the Platinum Imperial's layout with uncanny accuracy. "What are you drawing, Princess?" Sophia didn't look up from her work, pencil moving with purpose that suggested she was transcribing something she could see clearly in her mind. "The safe paths, where the cranes need to go to keep everyone protected." Natalie leaned closer, examining the notebook with professional interest that shifted into genuine surprise. The symbols Sophia had drawn weren't childish scribbles, but sophisticated representations of security vulnerabilities, surveillance blind spots, optimal positioning for tactical advantage. "Did you teach her this?" Daniel shook his head, throat tight with a familiar mixture of pride and concern that characterized most of his parenting experiences lately. Sophia possessed gifts he couldn't explain, inherited perhaps from Rachel's uncanny intuition, manifested through the origami rituals that gave his daughter comfort in a world that had stolen her mother. "She just sees things, patterns that other people miss." "Has since Rachel died." The admission felt dangerous, revealing vulnerability to someone who remained fundamentally a stranger, despite the origami cranes and shared danger. But Natalie's expression held no calculation or exploitation, just recognition of something she'd apparently encountered before. "My father's company worked on classified projects years ago. Neurological research, cognitive enhancement protocols for security personnel. Some of the test subjects reported their children developed unusual abilities, enhanced situational awareness, predictive pattern analysis. Nothing that could be scientifically verified, but too consistent to dismiss as coincidence." Daniel's stomach dropped as implications crystallized. Rachel had worked administrative support at the Platinum Imperial during those years, back when the hotel hosted corporate events for companies like Winter's Security. She'd been pregnant with Sophia during that period. First trimester, when neural development happened, when environmental factors could reshape a developing brain in ways science barely understood. You think Rachel was exposed to something, some kind of experimental protocol that affected Sophia in utero. Natalie's silence confirmed the speculation without committing to certainty. Sophia continued drawing, oblivious to, or choosing to ignore, the adults discussing her origins. Her pencil added details to the hotel map, marking locations with precision that suggested first-hand observation, despite having spent less than 2 hours in the Platinum Imperial's lobby. The map she's drawing. Those are actual blind spots in the hotel's security coverage. I spent 3 months studying the system, and I didn't identify half of these vulnerabilities. Natalie's professional assessment carried weight beyond simple compliment. This wasn't a proud adult patronizing a clever child. This was genuine recognition that Sophia possessed capabilities that transcended normal perception. Sophia looked up from her drawing, meeting Daniel's gaze with solemn intensity. "Mom knew. Before she got sick. She told me the cranes were important, that someday they'd protect you when I couldn't be there. She made me promise to keep folding them even after she was gone." The revelation hit Daniel like physical impact. Rachel had known. In those final lucid weeks before cancer consumed her completely, She'd prepared Sophia for a future that included protecting her father through folded paper and enhanced perception, which meant Rachel had understood something about their daughter's abilities, had perhaps known exactly what exposure during pregnancy might have caused. His wife had carried that knowledge to her grave, leaving behind only cryptic instructions wrapped in origami traditions, and a daughter whose gifts Daniel was only beginning to comprehend. Natalie's phone buzzed, shattering the moment. She glanced at the screen, expression tightening with new tension. Kane's already started. He just filed an incident report claiming you assaulted 2 security guards and threatened a hotel guest. NYPD has issued a warrant for your arrest. The words reshaped reality with brutal efficiency. Daniel had maybe hours before police connected his name to his address, before they showed up at his apartment with handcuffs and questions he couldn't answer without making things exponentially worse. Kane was moving fast, using institutional power to neutralize threats before they could organize effective resistance. Sophia's hand found Daniel's again, small fingers squeezing with surprising strength. We can't go home. The pattern breaks if we go back there. Her certainty carried weight Daniel had learned not to dismiss. Whatever Sophia perceived through her enhanced awareness, whatever patterns she tracked through methods he couldn't comprehend, his daughter was telling him their apartment had become a trap. Natalie made a decision, professional composure hardening into something more resolute. I have a safe house, Westridge neighborhood, residential area, nothing that would attract attention. It's registered under a shell corporation Kane won't trace immediately. We go there, figure out next steps, and decide how to handle the situation before it escalates further. Daniel weighed the offer against rapidly diminishing alternatives. Trust a woman he'd met 2 hours ago, or face arrest on fabricated charges with Sophia watching police take her father away in handcuffs. Not actually a choice, just acknowledgement that circumstances had stripped away his agency, leaving only surrender to lesser evils. One condition: Sophia's safety is non-negotiable. Whatever happens next, whatever you need from me, my daughter doesn't get caught in the crossfire. Natalie nodded without hesitation. Agreed. I have resources, FBI contacts, private security through my father's company, legal teams that specialize in exactly this kind of institutional corruption. We protect Sophia first. Everything else is secondary. The promise felt genuine, backed by resources Daniel couldn't access on his maintenance salary and $58 in savings. But promises were cheap. Rachel had extracted vows from him while dying, and Daniel had discovered that keeping them cost everything when circumstances conspired against you. Sophia packed her notebook carefully, folding several more cranes from napkins she'd apparently hoarded in anticipation of need. Her small backpack had become an arsenal of paper guardians, each one folded with precise technique that Rachel had taught her during those final lucid weeks. These are for the new place. Extra strong protection, because tonight's going to be darker than usual. The phrasing sent chills down Daniel's spine. His 8-year-old daughter was predicting danger with casual certainty that suggested her perception extended beyond pattern recognition into something closer to precognition. Rachel had possessed similar intuition, had somehow known the exact day her body would stop fighting cancer, despite doctors' assurances that she had weeks remaining. Natalie led them to her sedan, unremarkable vehicle that blended into traffic without attracting attention. Smart choice for someone conducting covert investigations, though Daniel noted the reinforced frame and bulletproof glass that marked it as far more than standard civilian transportation. The drive through Manhattan's perpetual congestion gave Daniel too much time to process the past 3 hours. This morning, he'd been invisible, just another maintenance worker earning barely enough to survive. Now he was marked for elimination by corrupt security, wanted by police on fabricated charges, trusting his daughter's safety to a woman whose last name represented corporate power and whose investigation had apparently triggered everything that was currently destroying his life. Sophia sat in the back seat, folding cranes with mechanical precision while her eyes tracked vehicles around them with wariness no child should need to possess. Daniel watched her in the rearview mirror, seeing Rachel's features overlaid on their daughter's face, seeing the woman he'd loved reflected in the child they'd created. The safe house materialized through Westridge's tree-lined streets, modest bungalow that could have belonged to any middle-class family trying to maintain stability in an increasingly unaffordable city. Natalie parked in the detached garage, closing the door before they exited the vehicle. Careful protocols that suggested she'd used this location before, that Kane wasn't the first threat she'd needed to hide from. Biometric lock on the front door recognized Natalie's fingerprint, deadbolts sliding open with mechanical precision. The interior matched the exterior's unremarkable presentation, minimal furniture, functional rather than comfortable, the aesthetic of a location meant for temporary occupation during crisis rather than actual living. Sophia explored with cautious curiosity, testing doors and checking windows with survival instincts Daniel wished she didn't possess. His daughter had learned that safety required constant verification, that trust needed to be earned through repeated demonstration rather than assumed based on adult assurances. "Is this like our emergency cabin, Daddy?" The question referenced a place that existed only in Daniel's contingency planning, theoretical safe location he'd never actually secured because safe locations required money he didn't have. But Sophia had absorbed his casual mentions of backup plans and escape protocols, had cataloged them into her own understanding of how survival worked when the world turned hostile. Similar, yes. We might need to stay here a little while. Natalie was already setting up equipment, laptop connecting to encrypted networks, surveillance feeds displaying hotel security footage she'd apparently hacked during her 3-month investigation. The screens showed Kane moving through the Platinum Imperial with purposeful intensity, coordinating with personnel who fanned through the building conducting searches. He's looking for something. Or someone. Natalie enlarged one feed, showing Kane entering executive offices that should have been locked at this hour. He emerged minutes later carrying a small metal case, handling it with careful precision that suggested fragile or dangerous contents. Sophia appeared at Daniel's elbow, studying the screens with focused concentration that indicated she was processing information on levels he couldn't access. Mom's box. The one she kept hidden in her old office before she got sick. Daniel's breath caught. Rachel had worked administrative support at the Platinum Imperial for 7 years before cancer forced her to stop. He'd helped her clean out her desk, had packed the personal items she'd accumulated during her employment. There had been no metal case, no hidden box that she'd mentioned or that he'd discovered. "Are you sure, Princess?" Sophia nodded with absolute certainty. "She showed me once. Said it had important things that might help people someday. Made me promise not to tell anyone until the right time. I think now is the right time." Natalie's expression shifted through several calculations, professional assessment giving way to something more visceral. If Rachel had gathered evidence about illegal operations at the hotel, if she'd hidden documentation before her illness, that would explain several anomalies Natalie had encountered during her investigation. 3 years ago, there was a brief spike in money laundering investigations targeting the Platinum Imperial. Someone had submitted anonymous tips to multiple agencies. The investigations went nowhere because all the physical evidence disappeared before warrants could be executed. Your wife worked there during that period. She had access to financial records, guest manifests, security footage archives. The implications crystallized with terrible clarity. Rachel hadn't died from cancer. Or rather, she had died from cancer, but the cancer itself might not have been the random cellular malfunction doctors had presented as inevitable biology. If Rachel had been investigating hotel operations, if she'd discovered evidence of criminal activity, if she'd become a threat to people like Kane who protected illegal operations. Sophia's small hand found Daniel's, squeezing with pressure that communicated what her young vocabulary couldn't articulate. Their daughter knew, had known all along that Rachel's death wasn't simple tragedy, but murder disguised as natural causes. 3 years Sophia had carried that knowledge, protecting her father from truth that would have destroyed him while he was still drowning in grief. We need to see what's in that case. Daniel's voice emerged steady despite the rage building in his chest, the fury that came from realizing his wife's death might have been prevented if he'd been paying attention instead of being consumed by medical bills and survival logistics. Natalie pulled up building schematics on her laptop, architectural blueprints overlaid with security camera coverage and guard rotation schedules. The case is probably in Kane's private office now. Third floor executive wing, restricted access requiring biometric authentication at 3 separate checkpoints. Even with my security credentials, I can't get there without triggering alerts that would bring response teams within 90 seconds. Sophia produced her notebook, flipping to a fresh page where she began sketching with focused intensity. Lines and symbols flowed from her pencil, creating a map that captured the Platinum Imperial's third floor with detail that suggested she'd somehow observed every corner despite never having accessed those restricted areas. This door has a broken magnetic lock. They use override codes instead of biometrics. And this hallway has cameras that don't record, just show live feeds. And the big elevator guard leaves his post every 30 minutes to check sports scores on his phone in the bathroom. Natalie studied the drawing with professional assessment that shifted into genuine astonishment. Every vulnerability Sophia had identified matched known weaknesses Natalie had spent weeks cataloging through careful observation and system analysis. How do you know this? Sophia looked up from her drawing, expression solemn and slightly confused by the question. I can see it. The patterns show me where people go and where they don't, where machines watch and where they're blind. It's like the cranes. I fold them and then I know where they need to be. Daniel met Natalie's gaze, seeing his own realization reflected in her expression. They'd both underestimated what Sophia represented. Not just a vulnerable child who needed protection, but a tactical asset whose capabilities could provide the advantage they needed against Kane's institutional power. The ethical implications made Daniel's stomach churn. Using his daughter's gifts felt like exploitation, putting Sophia in danger for purposes beyond simple survival. But Sophia was already in danger. Kane wouldn't stop with arresting Daniel. He'd investigate the entire family, would discover Sophia's unusual abilities through careful observation, would recognize her as either a threat or an asset to be controlled. We have to get that case tonight. Natalie's assessment carried weight of professional judgment rather than reckless desperation. Kane accelerated the timeline when you interfered this afternoon. He's consolidating evidence, preparing to eliminate anything that could expose his operations. If that case contains what I think it does, documentation your wife gathered before her death, it's the only physical proof that survives. Tomorrow, it might be destroyed or relocated beyond recovery. Daniel calculated the odds, running tactical scenarios with skills he'd hoped never to use again. Hotel security at night was lighter staffing, but higher alert status. Kane would have personnel watching for exactly this kind of incursion. Getting to the third floor executive wing required bypassing multiple checkpoints while avoiding detection that would trigger overwhelming response. Sophia returned to her notebook, adding details to her tactical map with focused precision that suggested she was refining real-time intelligence rather than drawing from memory. The pattern works if we go at 8:45. That's when everything lines up. 3 guards doing shift change, cleaning crew on second floor making noise that covers movement, kitchen delivery arriving at loading dock, pulling attention to the basement. 8:45. Less than 3 hours from now. Barely enough time to plan. No time to reconsider. Exactly the kind of compressed timeline that forced decisions before rational assessment could intervene. Natalie made phone calls, activating resources Daniel couldn't access independently. FBI contacts providing updated intelligence. Private security teams positioning as backup extraction if the situation deteriorated beyond control. Legal teams preparing to file emergency injunctions if arrests seemed imminent. The machinery of wealth and institutional power, deployed now in service of retrieving evidence that might expose exactly the kind of corruption those systems usually protected. Daniel recognized the irony, but couldn't afford to refuse help just because it came from sources that had historically oppressed people like him. Sophia worked at the kitchen table, creating more origami cranes with assembly line efficiency. Dozens of them emerged from hotel napkins and notebook paper, each one folded with precise technique and placed in specific positions around the safe house perimeter. "What are you doing, princess?" "Building the protection grid. If the bad men find this place while we're gone, the cranes will keep everything safe until we get back." The logic was 8-year-old magical thinking, belief that paper could ward against men with guns and institutional authority. But Daniel had learned not to dismiss Sophia's rituals. Whatever psychological comfort the origami provided, his daughter's confidence in her protective measures translated into reduced anxiety that kept her functional during crisis. Natalie provided equipment: compact radios with encrypted frequencies, lockpick sets disguised as fountain pens, miniature cameras that could attach to clothing and stream footage to her monitoring station. Tools that suggested her investigation had always anticipated the possibility of direct action rather than passive observation. "I'll stay here with Sophia. Monitor your progress remotely and coordinate extraction if things go wrong. My FBI contact is positioned 3 blocks from the hotel with a rapid response team that can be on site in under 3 minutes if you need backup." The plan was professional, backed by resources that reflected months of preparation. But plans collapsed when confronted with reality's refusal to cooperate with tactical projections. Daniel had seen enough operations fall apart to know that confidence was poison when dealing with hostile territory and motivated opposition. Sophia approached as Daniel prepared to leave, holding something wrapped in blue tissue paper. She pressed it into his hands with ceremonial gravity. "Mom's crane. The special one she made before she died. She said I'd know when you needed it." Daniel unwrapped the tissue carefully, revealing origami folded from paper that felt strangely heavy, almost metallic. The crane was black instead of the usual bright colors, constructed with complexity that exceeded normal folding techniques, and embedded at its center, barely visible through translucent paper, was something small and rectangular. USB drive. Rachel had hidden a USB drive inside an origami crane, had entrusted it to Sophia with instructions to give it to Daniel when the time was right. 3 years his daughter had protected this final message, waiting for circumstances to align with whatever pattern she perceived through her enhanced awareness. Mom said it has truth on it, about why she got sick, about the bad men at the hotel, about what needs to happen so they can't hurt other people like they hurt her. Daniel's hands shook as he held the crane. Rachel's final evidence wrapped in paper and trust and a daughter's absolute faith. His wife had known, had understood what was killing her, had gathered proof even while her body betrayed her, had prepared contingencies that required their daughter's unusual capabilities to execute. Natalie produced a laptop, isolated from network connections to prevent any malware on the drive from spreading. Daniel inserted the USB carefully, waiting while the system recognized the device and displayed its contents. A single video file, dated 3 years and 4 months ago, recorded 2 weeks before Rachel's cancer diagnosis. Daniel clicked play, stomach nodding as his wife's face filled the screen. She looked healthy in the video, vibrant and alive, in ways he'd almost forgotten after 14 months of watching disease hollow her out from inside. "If you're watching this, I'm probably dead. And if Sophia gave you this crane, it means the timing is right for you to know the truth." Rachel's voice carried calm certainty that pierced through Daniel's defenses. She'd recorded this knowing death was coming, had accepted her fate with grace that made his current rage feel small and impotent. "I discovered something at the hotel. Financial records that didn't make sense. Guests who checked in but never appeared on camera. Rooms that were cleaned but never officially occupied. I started documenting the discrepancies, gathering evidence, building a case to submit to authorities. The video cut to spreadsheets and photographs, documentation that captured systematic money laundering through the Platinum Imperial's reservation system. Fake guests, phantom transactions, shell companies moving millions through accounts designed to obscure the origin and destination of funds. Vincent Kane discovered my investigation 3 months into it. He approached me in the parking garage, showed me photographs of you picking up Sophia from school, told me accidents happened to people who interfered with operations they didn't understand, told me I could either forget everything I'd discovered or watch my family suffer consequences I wouldn't survive to regret. Rachel's face reappeared on screen, expression hardening with determination Daniel recognized from their years together. I agreed to stop, deleted my files from the hotel system, acted compliant and frightened. But I'd already copied everything to this drive. I was going to submit it anonymously through channels Kane couldn't trace. A pause while Rachel composed herself, gathering strength for what came next. 3 weeks after Kane's threat, I started feeling sick, dizzy, nauseous, exhausted in ways that sleep couldn't fix. I thought it was stress or maybe early pregnancy. Then the doctor found the tumors. Stage 3 breast cancer that had somehow metastasized without any prior symptoms. Aggressive and fast-moving in ways that didn't match any normal progression patterns. Daniel's breath stopped. On screen, Rachel's expression carried knowledge that turned his blood cold. I had my blood tested independently. Trace amounts of a carcinogenic compound that doesn't occur naturally. Someone poisoned me, Daniel. Someone at the hotel found a way to introduce toxins that would trigger cancer, that would kill me slowly while looking like tragic but natural disease. I have no proof. The compound metabolizes quickly, and by the time I tested, it was almost undetectable. But I know, and I need you to know. Tears streamed down Daniel's face as Rachel continued speaking from beyond death, delivering truth he'd been too consumed by grief to discover. I'm not telling you this for revenge. I'm telling you because the evidence on this drive needs to reach people who can stop Kane and everyone he protects. Hundreds of people are being trafficked through that hotel, Daniel. Women and children disappearing into networks that destroy lives. Money funding terrorism and organized crime. All of it hidden behind luxury and respectability. Rachel leaned closer to the camera, speaking directly to the husband she knew she'd leave behind. Promise me you'll finish what I started. Not immediately, not while you're drowning in grief and bills and single parenting. But someday, when the timing is right, when Sophia shows you this crane because she knows you're ready. Promise me you'll find good people and give them this evidence and make sure my death meant something. The video ended with Rachel's face frozen on screen. Final image of the woman Daniel had loved and lost and failed to protect. His hands clenched into fists, rage building in his chest like pressure seeking release through violence or tears or any action that might make the helplessness feel less suffocating. Sophia's arms wrapped around his waist from behind, her small body pressing against his back in silent comfort that acknowledged his pain without requiring words. His daughter had watched him play that video, had known exactly what it contained, had carried the weight of Rachel's murder for 3 years while protecting her father from truth he couldn't have handled while still drowning in raw grief. Natalie's expression held professional assessment, layered over genuine sympathy. She'd wanted evidence. Rachel had provided it in devastating detail, complete with documentation that would stand up in federal court if they could deliver it to prosecutors Kane hadn't corrupted. We have everything we need to destroy Kane's operation and everyone he protects, but only if we get that metal case tonight. Your wife's digital evidence is crucial, but physical documentation from the hotel's own records makes the case ironclad. Daniel wiped his face, forcing grief back into the locked compartment where he stored emotions that threatened to paralyze him when Sophia needed him functional. Rachel had trusted him with this final mission, had prepared their daughter to guide him through it when the timing aligned. 8:45. 2 hours remained before the window Sophia had identified opened and closed. Daniel examined the tactical map his daughter had created, memorizing routes and vulnerabilities, planning contingencies for when everything inevitably went wrong. Natalie briefed him on security protocols with professional efficiency, sharing intelligence she'd gathered during 3 months of careful observation, guard rotations, camera coverage, biometric authentication sequences, escape routes if primary extraction became compromised. Sophia placed the black crane in Daniel's shirt pocket with ceremonial care, patting it twice through the fabric in their familiar ritual. "Mom's with you now, and I'll be watching. The pattern holds as long as we trust it." 8-year-old faith in magical thinking and enhanced perception, wrapped in origami and delivered with absolute certainty. Daniel kissed his daughter's forehead, inhaling the shampoo scent that reminded him of Rachel, of bedtime stories and normal life before cancer stole everything. One operation: retrieve the case, deliver justice for Rachel. Then figure out how to build something resembling safety from the wreckage Cain had created by marking him for elimination. The night air hit Daniel's face as he exited the safe house, cool and sharp with the promise of autumn bleeding into Manhattan's perpetual chaos. He'd spent 3 years invisible, keeping his head down, surviving rather than living. Rachel's video had shattered that careful anonymity, had reminded him that some promises cost everything to keep, but destroyed you completely if you broke them. Daniel walked toward his Jeep, checking equipment and reviewing tactical plans, while the black crane pressed against his chest like a second heartbeat. Somewhere in the Platinum Imperial's executive wing, Cain thought he'd consolidated his power, eliminated threats, protected operations that fed on human suffering. The wrong man was about to prove Cain's assessment catastrophically inaccurate. The Platinum Imperial's service entrance opened through a swipe card Natalie had cloned from hotel maintenance databases. Daniel slipped through at 8:43, exactly 2 minutes before Sophia's predicted convergence window. The loading dock hummed with activity as kitchen suppliers unloaded produce and dry goods, creating noise and distraction that masked his entry into the building's arterial passages. Fluorescent lighting buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows through concrete corridors that existed separate from the lobby's crystalline luxury. This was the hotel's hidden infrastructure, the utilitarian reality that kept elegant facades functioning while remaining invisible to guests who paid premium rates to never witness how their comfort was manufactured. Daniel's radio crackled softly, Natalie's voice filtering through the encrypted frequency. "You're on schedule. Second floor cleaning crew just started their rounds. Shift change happening at the main security station in 90 seconds. Your window opens in exactly 2 minutes." The tactical precision felt surreal, as if Daniel had stepped sideways into someone else's life where covert operations and evidence retrieval constituted normal evening activities. 3 hours ago, he'd been an invisible maintenance worker earning poverty wages. Now he was infiltrating the same building where he'd spent 5 years working security, moving through familiar territory that had become hostile the moment Cain designated him wrong man. The stairwell emerged ahead, door marked "Authorized Personnel Only" in faded lettering that nobody paid attention to because the real security happened through biometric locks and camera coverage. Daniel tested the handle, finding it unlocked exactly as Sophia's map had indicated. His daughter's enhanced perception had identified this oversight and the hotel's otherwise comprehensive security architecture. He climbed quickly, boots making minimal noise on concrete steps designed for utility rather than acoustics. Rachel's black crane pressed against his chest through the shirt pocket, origami talisman carrying his wife's final mission and their daughter's absolute faith that folded paper could protect against institutional violence. Third-floor access required bypassing a magnetic lock that, according to Sophia's intelligence, had been broken for 6 weeks and never repaired. Daniel produced the override code Natalie had extracted from maintenance records, punching numbers while counting seconds until guard rotation created the blind spot his insertion required. The lock disengaged with soft click, admitting him to the executive wing where carpeting muffled footsteps and indirect lighting created atmosphere of hushed importance. Corporate art lined walls decorated in neutral tones, designed to project power without intimidation, everything calculated to reassure wealthy guests that their money bought access to excellence and discretion. Kane's office waited at the corridor's terminus, door labeled Director of Security in brass lettering that gleamed under recessed lighting. Daniel approached with measured pace that suggested he belonged in this space, that maintenance personnel had legitimate business accessing executive areas during evening hours when actual work happened. The biometric lock beside Kane's door would have stopped most intruders, but Natalie's 3 months of investigation had included lifting Kane's fingerprint from a coffee cup and creating a replica that fooled standard security sensors. Daniel pressed the synthetic fingerprint against the reader, holding his breath while the system processed and granted access. Kane's office reflected corporate efficiency rather than personal indulgence. Minimal decoration, functional furniture, surveillance monitors displaying feeds from cameras positioned throughout the hotel. Daniel spotted his own Jeep on one screen, still parked blocks away where he'd left it. Another monitor showed the safe house exterior, confirming Kane had resources positioned to track vehicles and locations despite Natalie's careful operational security. The metal case sat on Kane's desk, unguarded and obvious in ways that triggered every tactical instinct Daniel had developed during 5 years of security work. This felt wrong. Too easy. Like bait designed to lure rather than evidence carelessly left exposed. Natalie's voice crackled through the radio. "Do you see it? The case Rachel referenced?" Daniel approached carefully, scanning for tripwires or pressure sensors that might trigger alarms when the case was moved. Nothing obvious, but sophisticated systems could hide triggers within everyday objects. "It's here, but something feels off. Trust your instincts. If it looks like a trap, abort and extract immediately." Daniel examined the case without touching it, noting the combination lock that required a 4-digit code. He could force it, but breaking the lock would alert Kane that someone had accessed his office. Better to open it properly, photograph the contents, and leave evidence that the incursion had happened. Sophia's voice surprised him, young tone filtering through the radio with unexpected authority. "The code is Rachel's birthday, month and day." He doesn't know we know about the case, so he used something simple he could remember. Rachel's birthday, March 15th. Daniel punched in 0315, feeling the lock disengage with mechanical precision. The case opened to reveal documentation that made his breath catch. Financial records spanning 8 years, guest manifests with highlighted names, photographs showing prominent business leaders and politicians entering rooms with individuals who were clearly underage. This wasn't just money laundering. This was blackmail infrastructure, systematic exploitation designed to compromise powerful people and control their decisions through threat of exposure. Rachel had discovered a network that extended far beyond the Platinum Imperial, reaching into corporate boardrooms and government offices. The radio crackled again, Natalie's voice tight with new urgency. "We have a problem. Kane just left his apartment. He's heading toward the hotel. ETA, 12 minutes. Daniel's tactical assessment shifted immediately. 12 minutes to photograph everything, close the case, exit the building, and reach extraction point before Kane arrived and discovered the breach. Possible, but requiring perfect execution with zero margin for error. He produced the miniature camera Natalie had provided, photographing each document with methodical efficiency while his internal clock counted seconds. Financial records, guest lists, photographs that would destroy careers and trigger federal investigations across multiple jurisdictions. The documents told a story that made Daniel's stomach churn. The Platinum Imperial wasn't just hosting illegal activities, it was purpose-built infrastructure for systematic exploitation, designed to compromise powerful individuals who could then be leveraged for political and economic advantage. Kane wasn't the architect. He was middle management, implementing protocols developed by organizations whose reach extended beyond anything Daniel had imagined. Rachel had discovered this 3 years ago, had gathered enough evidence to expose the entire network. And someone had murdered her for it, poisoning her slowly while making her death look like tragic but natural disease. 8 minutes remained before Kane's arrival. Daniel finished photographing the final documents, hands shaking with rage that threatened to overwhelm his tactical discipline. These people had killed his wife, had orphaned his daughter, had operated with impunity for years because they'd compromised everyone with authority to stop them. The radio crackled with new voice, male and professional. "This is Agent Morrison, FBI. Ms. Winters briefed me on your operation. We have tactical teams positioned around the hotel perimeter. If you need extraction support, we're ready to move." Federal backup changed the tactical equation significantly. Daniel wasn't alone in hostile territory with limited resources. He had institutional power, positions to intervene if Kane's response escalated beyond control. He closed the case carefully, resetting the combination lock to 0315, erasing any obvious evidence that someone had accessed the contents. The office looked undisturbed, surveillance monitors still displaying their feeds, everything positioned exactly as he'd found it. 6 minutes until Kane's arrival. Daniel exited the office, pulling the door closed and hearing the biometric lock engage. The corridor remained empty, executive wing abandoned during evening hours when actual business happened in lobbies and conference rooms. The stairwell beckoned, promising escape route that would take him back to loading dock and out into night before Kane could discover the breach. Daniel moved quickly, descending concrete steps while counting seconds and calculating distances. He reached the second-floor landing as voices echoed from below. Multiple individuals moving through the loading dock with purpose that suggested security sweep rather than routine patrol. Kane had accelerated his timeline, arriving earlier than projected, bringing personnel to lock down the building before Daniel could extract. The radio crackled. "Change of plans. Loading dock is compromised. You need alternate extraction. Second floor has maintenance access to adjacent building through the HVAC system. Use that route and emerge 3 blocks north. We'll reposition pickup." Daniel reversed direction, moving back to the second floor where maintenance corridors connected to neighboring structures through utility tunnels designed for emergency access. The HVAC route required crawling through ductwork barely wide enough for his shoulders, navigating in darkness guided only by blueprint memorization and Sophia's tactical map. The maintenance door opened without resistance, admitting him to service passages filled with pipe runs and electrical conduits. The air smelled of metal and recycled atmosphere, industrial reality hidden behind luxury hotel presentation. Voices echoed through the corridor behind him, security personnel conducting systematic sweep of the executive wing. Kane would discover his office had been accessed within minutes, would recognize that someone had photographed the evidence he'd consolidated for disposal. Daniel crawled into the HVAC duct, pulling the access panel closed behind him. Darkness enveloped him completely, claustrophobic enclosure that pressed from all sides while his hands and knees scraped across metal surfaces designed for airflow rather than human passage. The radio stayed silent, preventing transmission noise that might alert searchers to his location. Daniel navigated through memory and instinct, counting junction points and calculating distance while trying to control breathing that wanted to accelerate into panic. Rachel had died in similar darkness, cancer consuming her from inside while Daniel watched helplessly. 3 years he'd avoided enclosed spaces, hadn't been able to tolerate even crowded subway cars. Now necessity forced him back into suffocating confinement, moving through industrial arteries while security swept the building, searching for wrong man. Light appeared ahead, maintenance access panel glowing with illumination from the adjacent building. Daniel reached the junction and tested the panel, finding it secured by simple latch rather than biometric lock. The neighboring structure wasn't part of the Platinum Imperial's security network, just commercial office space that shared utility infrastructure. He emerged into a janitor's closet, breathing hard and fighting the panic response that came from enclosed space trauma. The room smelled of cleaning chemicals and floor wax, familiar scents from his current maintenance work that grounded him back in present reality. The radio crackled as soon as he cleared the HVAC system. "Extraction vehicle is positioned on West 43rd Street, 3 blocks north of your current location. FBI teams are creating diversion at the hotel's main entrance to pull security attention away from your extraction point." Daniel exited the office building through a service entrance, emerging onto Manhattan streets where evening foot traffic provided cover among anonymous thousands moving through the city. He walked quickly, but without obvious haste, just another working man heading home after a long shift. Sirens wailed in the distance, multiple emergency vehicles converging on the Platinum Imperial. The FBI diversion was working, creating chaos that would occupy Kane's security while Daniel completed his extraction. Police cars blocked the hotel's main entrance, officers emerging with weapons drawn in response to reported threats that would vanish upon investigation but consume resources in the interim. The extraction vehicle materialized exactly where Natalie had promised, unremarkable sedan with tinted windows that opened as Daniel approached. He slid into the back seat, heart still hammering from the crawl through darkness and the near encounter with Kane's security sweep. Natalie turned from the driver's seat, expression tight with professional assessment. "Did you get it? The photographs?" Daniel produced the camera, uploading images to Natalie's laptop while she drove through traffic that barely noticed another sedan joining Manhattan's perpetual flow. The photographs appeared on screen, clear documentation of financial crimes and exploitation networks that extended across state lines and international borders. "This is everything we need: financial records, guest manifests, photographic evidence of systematic exploitation. Combined with Rachel's digital documentation, we have enough to trigger federal investigations that will dismantle Kane's entire operation." The triumph in her voice felt hollow against the reality of what those investigations would cost. Months of testimony, media attention, Sophia's privacy destroyed as reporters dug into every detail of their lives, searching for narrative angles. The price of justice measured in exposure and vulnerability, when Daniel had spent 3 years trying to stay invisible. Sophia's voice filtered through the radio, steady despite the circumstances. "Daddy did good." The pattern held. Now we just need to finish the last part. The last part. Selling evidence to authorities who might actually prosecute rather than bury. Finding people Kane hadn't corrupted or compromised. Building a case that could withstand legal challenges from opponents with unlimited resources and institutional protection. Natalie drove toward the safe house through routes designed to detect and evade surveillance. The photographs would be encrypted and distributed to multiple secure locations, ensuring that even if Kane managed to eliminate one copy, others would survive. Federal prosecutors would receive everything by morning, backed by FBI testimony that legitimized the evidence chain and prevented dismissal as unreliable civilian testimony. The safe house appeared through Westridge's quiet streets, unremarkable bungalow that had become temporary sanctuary while Daniel's world restructured around new reality. He was no longer invisible maintenance worker surviving on poverty wages. He was witness to federal crimes, target of elimination by corrupt security, father trying to protect his daughter while delivering justice for his murdered wife. Sophia met him at the door, arms wrapping around his waist with fierce intensity that communicated relief beyond her vocabulary. Daniel held his daughter, breathing in her shampoo scent and feeling Rachel's black crane pressed between them like a promise kept. "Mom's proud of you. I can feel it. She's been waiting 3 years for this night." 8-year-old certainty delivered with absolute conviction, as if communication with dead mothers constituted normal childhood experience. Daniel had stopped questioning Sophia's perceptions months ago, had learned that his daughter accessed information through channels he couldn't comprehend or verify. Natalie activated secure communication channels, conferencing with FBI contacts who were already processing the intelligence Daniel had extracted. Agent Morrison's face appeared on the laptop screen, professional assessment evident in his expression. "The evidence is solid. Financial crimes across multiple jurisdictions, human trafficking, blackmail operations involving federal officials. We're initiating operations to secure witnesses and freeze assets before Kane can relocate resources. But we need to address the immediate threat to your safety. Kane knows you accessed his office. He knows someone photographed evidence he was planning to destroy. He'll assume you were involved since you're already designated as threat. That makes you and your daughter targets for elimination before you can testify." The assessment was clinical, but accurate. Daniel had traded invisibility for evidence, had marked himself for violence in service of promises to a dead wife and justice for victims he'd never met. We can offer protective custody. Safe location with federal marshals until prosecutions are complete. It's not ideal, but it's the best option for keeping you and Sophia alive long enough to see Cain arrested and tried. Protective custody meant giving up what little autonomy remained, surrendering control to federal systems that had historically failed to protect people who looked like Daniel. Witness protection had mixed track record at best, catastrophic failure rate when dealing with sophisticated opponents who had institutional connections. Sophia's hand found his, small fingers squeezing with pressure that communicated something beyond simple comfort. The pattern says we're safe if we stay together. All three of us. You and me and Miss Natalie. If we separate, everything breaks. Enhanced perception or childish magical thinking, Daniel couldn't determine which. But Sophia had been right about the timing, the access routes, the extraction window. His daughter's gifts had proven accurate enough that dismissing her assessment felt dangerously arrogant. Natalie met Daniel's gaze, recognition passing between them that Sophia's statement carried weight beyond surface meaning. I have resources beyond federal protective custody. Private security through my father's company. Safe locations that aren't in any government database. We could disappear for a few weeks while Morrison builds his case. Emerge when it's safer to testify publicly. Agent Morrison's expression tightened with professional disagreement. Declining federal protection is your choice, but I strongly advise against it. Cain has resources and connections that make civilian security inadequate for the level of threat you're facing. The choice crystallized with brutal clarity. Trust federal systems that had historically failed people like him, or trust the woman he'd met 6 hours ago, whose investigation had triggered everything currently destroying his life. Neither option offered genuine safety, just different configurations of risk and vulnerability. Sophia's voice cut through his deliberation. Miss Natalie is part of the pattern. She needs to stay with us, or everything we did tonight doesn't work. We'll take our chances with private security, at least for now. If the situation changes, we can reconsider federal protection. Agent Morrison accepted the decision with professional resignation. Your choice. I'll coordinate with Ms. Winters on security protocols and keep you updated on investigation progress. Be careful. Cain won't stop just because we're building a case. He'll escalate before we can make arrests. The video conference ended, leaving Daniel alone with Natalie and Sophia in the safe house that had become temporary refuge. 3 people bound together by violence and evidence, and a child's absolute faith that patterns held as long as trust remained intact. Natalie pulled up her laptop, accessing files that displayed Richard Winters' corporate security resources. Locations across 3 states, personnel with military and intelligence backgrounds, technology that matched or exceeded what federal agencies deployed for witness protection. My father and I have complicated history, but he'll help with this, partly because it's the right thing to do, partly because Cain's operation implicates some of his clients. If Winters' security provided protection for hotels running trafficking networks, that creates liability exposure he'll want to address aggressively. The corporate calculus felt cold but pragmatic. Richard Winters would protect them because doing so served his business interests, not from altruism or moral conviction. Daniel had learned to accept help from imperfect sources, had survived 3 years by recognizing that purity of motivation mattered less than practical results. Sophia had returned to her origami, creating more cranes with focused intensity, while adults discussed security logistics and extraction timelines. Her small hands moved through familiar folds with muscle memory inherited from Rachel, transforming paper into protection through rituals Daniel no longer questioned. Natalie's phone buzzed, Morrison's name appearing on the screen. She answered on speaker, face tightening as the FBI agent delivered his update. We have a problem. Cain disappeared 15 minutes ago. Left the Platinum Imperial through a service exit and hasn't surfaced at any known location. His vehicle is still in the hotel garage. He's gone dark with resources we can't track. The implication hung heavy. Kane had recognized that his operation was compromised, that evidence was out of his control, that prosecution was inevitable, unless he eliminated witnesses before they could testify. He'd abandoned his position and infrastructure to focus on the immediate threat. "Do you have security cameras on the safe house perimeter?" Natalie checked her surveillance feeds, tension visible in the set of her shoulders. All clear. No movement outside normal neighborhood patterns. But that meant nothing if Kane had resources positioned beyond camera range, if he'd identified the safe house location through methods that bypassed Natalie's operational security. Daniel moved to the window, scanning the street for vehicles that didn't belong, for shadows that suggested surveillance positions. The night outside appeared normal. Tree-lined residential streets, porch lights illuminating well-maintained lawns. The comfortable anonymity of middle-class neighborhoods where people lived ordinary lives insulated from the violence that consumed those without resources or protection. Sophia appeared beside him, hands full of origami cranes she positioned on the windowsill with careful precision. "They're coming, but not yet. We have time to get ready if we use it right." Daniel wanted to dismiss his daughter's prediction as anxiety manifesting through ritualized coping, but Sophia had been accurate about everything else tonight. The timing, the access routes, the pattern that it held through operation and extraction. How much time? Sophia tilted her head, processing information through methods Daniel couldn't access. Morning, when the sun comes up. That's when the pattern says they'll move. 6 hours, enough time to relocate if they acted immediately, or to fortify position if staying seemed more tactically sound. Daniel turned to Natalie, recognizing that her resources and experience exceeded his own. "What do you think? Run or defend?" Natalie pulled up tactical maps, evaluating the safe house location against alternative positions her father's company maintained. "This location is compromised if Kane has access to the same databases I used to select it. Moving creates exposure during transport, but staying means fighting on terrain Kane might have already scouted. Neither option is good." Sophia's voice carried unexpected authority. "We stay. The pattern works if we're here when they come. Other places break the protection." Daniel met his daughter's gaze, seeing certainty that transcended normal childhood confidence. Sophia knew. Through whatever enhanced perception she'd inherited or developed, his daughter could see convergence patterns that predicted outcomes based on variables adults couldn't track. "We stay, but we prepare for the worst." Natalie made phone calls, activating security resources that arrived within 90 minutes. Private contractors with military backgrounds who established defensive perimeters and surveillance systems around the safe house. Not federal marshals constrained by jurisdiction and protocol, but corporate security operating under looser rules that prioritized client protection over legal niceties. The safe house transformed into defensive position, reinforced entry points and overlapping fields of fire that would make assault costly for attackers. Not impenetrable, but dangerous enough that Kane would need overwhelming force or surprise to breach successfully. Sophia worked through the preparation with focused calm, positioning her origami cranes in patterns that made sense only to her. Daniel watched his daughter create protective grids from folded paper, watched her absolute faith that rituals could ward against men with guns and institutional authority. The night crawled past midnight, hours compressing into hyper-alert vigilance that made sleep impossible. Daniel maintained position near the window, watching streets that remained empty despite Sophia's prediction of morning attack. Maybe his daughter was wrong this time. Maybe Kane had fled rather than escalating. Maybe the pattern had broken. Dawn arrived with pale light that transformed darkness into gray uncertainty. The street outside remained quiet, early morning stillness before the neighborhood woke to another ordinary day. Sophia appeared at Daniel's elbow, looking tired but certain. 15 minutes. They're positioning now. Daniel scanned the visible perimeter, seeing nothing that suggested imminent assault. But Sophia had been right about everything else. Dismissing her warning would be arrogant stupidity. He alerted the security team, watching them shift into combat readiness with professional efficiency. Weapons checked, communications verified, defensive positions reinforced. All preparation for violence that might not come, or might arrive with overwhelming force that no amount of preparation could withstand. The explosion shattered morning stillness 14 minutes after Sophia's warning. Concussion wave hitting the safe house with force that knocked Daniel off his feet. Windows burst inward, spraying glass across rooms where moments before people had stood watching empty streets. The detonation came from the street side. Shape charge designed to breach the reinforced front wall while creating chaos that would cover the main assault. Sophia's scream cut through the ringing in Daniel's ears. He scrambled toward his daughter through smoke and debris, finding her pressed against the interior wall where the blast had thrown her. Blood streamed from a cut above her eye, but she was breathing, conscious, alive. Daniel pulled her close, sheltering her body with his as secondary explosions rocked the structure. The assault came through multiple entry points simultaneously. Professional coordination that overwhelmed defensive positions through sheer aggressive speed. Not Kames hotel security. These were military contractors, specialists trained for exactly this kind of forced entry against hardened targets. Flashbangs detonated in rapid succession, disorienting Natalie's security team before they could establish effective resistance. Gunfire erupted as the defenders engaged attackers pouring through breached walls. Muzzle flashes strobed through smoke-filled rooms, creating surreal tableau of violence in slow motion. Daniel recognized the tactical formation, the way the assault team moved with synchronized precision that spoke of extensive training and battlefield experience. He grabbed Sophia, crawling toward the interior bathroom where reinforced walls provided better protection than exposed rooms. Rachel's black crane had fallen from his pocket during the explosion, origami crushed beneath falling debris. Daniel snatched it as he moved, unwilling to lose his wife's final gift even while his world collapsed into violence. Natalie appeared through the smoke, blood running from a laceration on her forehead, but moving with purposeful efficiency. She laid down, suppressing fire toward the main breach, giving Daniel the seconds he needed to reach the bathroom with Sophia. Their eyes met briefly, understanding passing between them without words. She'd buy him time. He'd protect their daughter. The bathroom door slammed shut behind them, flimsy barrier that would buy seconds rather than safety. Daniel positioned himself between Sophia and the entry point, recognizing that his body was the last defense his daughter had against men who'd been sent to eliminate witnesses before federal prosecution could proceed. Sophia's hands moved with desperate speed despite her injury, folding more cranes from tissues she pulled from the bathroom dispenser. Her fingers shook but maintained the familiar patterns, creating protection through ritual even while explosions shook the house and gunfire promised death waiting just beyond the door. "The pattern holds, Daddy. We just need to trust it a little longer." 8-year-old Faith delivered while blood ran down her face, and men with automatic weapons fought through rooms between them and escape. Daniel held his daughter, feeling her heartbeat racing against his chest, promising Rachel's memory that he'd keep their child safe, even if keeping that promise cost him everything. The gunfire outside intensified, multiple weapons exchanging fire in close quarters. Natalie's security team was fighting hard, but they were outgunned and outmaneuvered by attackers who'd planned this assault with professional precision. The contractors had known exactly where to hit, exactly when defensive positions would be weakest, exactly how to maximize casualties while minimizing their own exposure, which meant Kane had intelligence about the safe house that went beyond simple surveillance. Someone had provided detailed information about security arrangements, personnel positioning, structural vulnerabilities. Someone close to Natalie's operation had fed Kane everything he needed to plan an overwhelming assault. The bathroom door shuddered under impact from outside, heavy boots kicking rather than shooting, suggesting the attackers wanted to take them alive. Witnesses who died in firefights couldn't testify, but neither could they be interrogated about what evidence they'd gathered or who else they'd shared it with. Kane needed them breathing long enough to determine what damage control required. Daniel braced against the door with his shoulder, buying precious seconds while calculating options that had narrowed to nothing. No weapons, no backup route. Just a father and daughter trapped in a bathroom while professional killers breached the only barrier between them and capture. Sophia pressed another crane into his hand, this one folded from bright red tissue. "For Mrs. Harris. She's coming. The pattern showed me." The words made no sense. Mrs. Harris was their elderly neighbor from the Bronx, a 72-year-old widow who brought casseroles and watched Sophia when Daniel worked late shifts. She had no connection to this safe house, no way of knowing they were under attack, no reason to be anywhere near Westridge at dawn. The door splintered under another kick, wood cracking around the hinges. One more impact would breach it completely. Daniel positioned himself to fight with bare hands against armed contractors, knowing the attempt was futile but unable to surrender while Sophia still lived and needed protecting. The sound that interrupted the assault came from outside the house, not an explosion this time, but something sharper and more decisive. A shotgun blast, followed immediately by another. Then shouting in voices Daniel didn't recognize, commands issued with authority that suggested law enforcement rather than private contractors. The kicking stopped. The contractor on the other side of the door moved away, boots retreating rapidly. More shotgun blasts, closer now, accompanied by the distinctive crack of high-powered rifles. The assault team was under fire from outside the house, caught between Natalie's defenders and new arrivals who'd flanked their position. Daniel risked opening the bathroom door a crack, peering through smoke-filled hallway toward the main living area. The scene had transformed into chaos as assault team members retreated through their breach points, returning fire at targets Daniel couldn't see. One contractor fell, then another, dropped by precision shots that suggested professional marksmanship. Through the smoke and confusion, Daniel spotted an impossible figure. Mrs. Dorothy Harris, 72 years old and barely 5 feet tall, stood in the shattered doorway with a pump-action shotgun that seemed to materialize from some hidden dimension. She fired with practiced efficiency, the weapon's recoil barely moving her slight frame as she advanced into the house with shocking fearlessness. Behind her came FBI tactical teams, Agent Morrison leading with weapon raised and badge displayed. Federal agents poured through entry points the contractors had created, overwhelming the assault team with superior numbers and positioning. The tide turned in seconds, professional killers becoming cornered targets as Morrison's teams executed a textbook intervention. Natalie emerged from defensive position behind overturned furniture, weapon still raised but lowering as she recognized federal backup. Blood soaked her sleeve from a wound Daniel hadn't seen her take, but she remained upright and functional. Their eyes met across the chaos, relief and confusion mixing in equal measure. The firefight ended as quickly as it had begun. Surviving contractors dropped weapons and raised hands, recognizing that resistance meant death, while surrender offered slim possibility of survival. Morrison's team secured them with professional efficiency, cable ties and Miranda warnings delivered while clearing rooms for additional threats. Mrs. Harris lowered her shotgun, examining the carnage with critical eye that suggested this wasn't her first experience with violence. She spotted Daniel emerging from the bathroom with Sophia, and her expression softened from combat readiness to grandmotherly concern. "Child shouldn't see this. Get her out." The command carried authority that transcended her elderly appearance. Daniel moved quickly, shielding Sophia's eyes from the bodies and blood while guiding her toward the front door. Mrs. Harris intercepted them, pressing something into Daniel's hand before they passed. "Your wife gave me that 3 years ago. Said you'd need it someday when the Cranes came home." Daniel looked down to find a small key, brass and old-fashioned, attached to a tag marked Storage Unit 247. Rachel had given Mrs. Harris a key 3 years ago, anticipating scenarios that Daniel was only now beginning to comprehend. His wife had prepared contingencies upon contingencies, had distributed evidence and resources through networks Daniel hadn't known existed. Morrison appeared, holstering his weapon while surveying the damage with professional assessment. "We've been monitoring Kane's communications since last night. Intercepted the assault order and mobilized response teams. Mrs. Harris contacted us 6 hours ago, said a child had called her from this address, saying her father needed the neighbors." Daniel looked at Sophia, who met his gaze with solemn certainty. "I called her while you were sleeping. The pattern showed me she needed to know where we were." 8-year-old tactical genius, using phone Daniel hadn't known she'd accessed to summon reinforcements through channels that bypassed all official protocols. His daughter had saved them by trusting enhanced perception Daniel still didn't fully understand. "Kane?" Morrison's expression darkened. "In custody. We grabbed him 2 blocks from here, directing the assault remotely. He's looking at federal charges that will put him away for life. Money laundering, human trafficking, blackmail, attempted murder of federal witnesses. The evidence you gathered last night started falling dominoes. We've already arrested 12 people across 4 states, with more to come." The immediate threat had been neutralized, but Daniel recognized that prosecution was just beginning. Months of testimony, media coverage, Sophia's abilities potentially becoming public knowledge as lawyers dug into every detail of how they'd survived. Natalie approached, medics wrapping her arm where a bullet had grazed during the firefight. Her professional composure had returned despite the blood and chaos. "My father sending cleanup teams and legal support. This never happened officially. The contractors were acting on their own, no connection to any hotel or corporation that might create liability exposure. The corporate machinery already spinning the narrative, protecting institutions while individuals took the fall." Daniel recognized the pattern, but couldn't summon outrage. They were alive. Sophia was safe. Kane was in custody, facing consequences that would end him. Mrs. Harris was examining Sophia's forehead injury with practiced efficiency, cleaning blood while murmuring reassurances in Spanish that somehow transcended language barriers. The elderly woman's presence remained inexplicable, a neighbor from the Bronx materializing in Westridge with shotgun and FBI connections. "How did you know?" Mrs. Harris met Daniel's gaze with eyes that had seen more than her appearance suggested. "Your wife and I talked before she died. About contingencies. About protecting you and the child if things went wrong. She gave me names to call, places to watch, instructions for scenarios she hoped would never happen. I've been waiting 3 years for the phone to ring." Rachel's final network, established through a dying woman's determination to protect her family beyond the grave. Mrs. Harris was one piece, the storage unit key another. Probably more that Daniel hadn't yet discovered. His wife had built redundancy into her contingency planning, ensuring that even if primary channels failed, backup systems would engage. The FBI teams finished securing the scene, loading contractors into vehicles for transport to federal detention. Morrison approached with tablet displaying documentation. "We'll need formal statements, but that can wait until you've received medical attention and legal counsel. Ms. Winters has volunteered to coordinate your security during the investigation. Given the circumstances, I'm inclined to accept that arrangement rather than insisting on federal protective custody." Sophia tugged at Daniel's hand, pointing toward Mrs. Harris, who was gathering her shotgun and preparing to leave. "We should invite her to stay. The pattern works better when everyone's together." Daniel watched the elderly woman who'd appeared with impossible timing and deadly efficiency, recognizing that she represented connections to Rachel he'd never known existed. His wife had trusted Mrs. Harris with contingencies and evidence, had built relationships that extended beyond the immediate family Daniel had assumed comprised their entire support network. "Mrs. Harris, would you consider staying with us, at least until this situation stabilizes?" The elderly woman studied him for a long moment before nodding. "The child needs consistency, and you need someone who knew Rachel, who understands what she built. Yes, I'll stay." Epilogue. 5 years later. The community center opened its doors on an October morning bright with autumn light. The building occupied what had been a vacant warehouse in the Bronx, transformed through Natalie's foundation funding and Daniel's hands-on construction work into a space designed for exactly the kind of support Rachel would have championed. The Rachel Porter Foundation for Survivors served trafficking victims, providing legal assistance, housing support, job training, and therapy services. The center had helped 217 people in its first year of operation, with numbers growing as word spread through networks of those who'd escaped exploitation networks like the one Cain had protected. Daniel stood in the main hall, watching Sophia direct the setup for today's event. His daughter had turned 13, grown tall and confident, while maintaining the enhanced perception that had saved their lives 5 years ago. She used those gifts now for foundation work, somehow sensing which survivors needed which resources before formal intake assessments confirmed her intuitions. Natalie appeared beside him, moving with easy familiarity that spoke of 5 years building something neither had expected when they'd met in a hotel lobby. She wore simple professional attire, the corporate polish softened by genuine warmth she'd developed through foundation work. Her father, Richard Winters, served on the board, their reconciliation another unexpected outcome of the investigation that had dismantled Cain's network. Ready for the ceremony? Daniel nodded, feeling the familiar mixture of pride and sorrow that characterized events like this. The Rachel Porter Act had passed Congress 2 years ago, mandating independent toxicology screening for suspicious cancer cases and establishing federal oversight of hotel security operations. The legislation had identified 17 other poisoning cases similar to Rachel's, triggering prosecutions that were still working through courts. Mrs. Harris emerged from the kitchen, carrying trays of food she'd prepared, despite Daniel's protests that catering had been arranged. The elderly woman had become a permanent fixture in their lives. Living in the brownstone Daniel and Natalie had purchased 3 blocks from the foundation, she maintained her shotgun in a locked case, occasionally cleaning it while sharing stories about her late husband, who'd apparently been something more than the accountant she'd initially described. Sophia approached, carrying something wrapped in familiar blue tissue. She'd continued folding origami cranes, though now they were sold at the foundation gift shop, with proceeds supporting survivor services. Her creations had become somewhat famous, featured in media coverage about the foundation and the extraordinary child whose enhanced perception had helped expose a criminal network. For today, special occasion requires special protection. Daniel unwrapped the tissue to find a crane folded from paper that shimmered with metallic threads, complex beyond anything Sophia had created before. The technique had evolved over 5 years, incorporating elements Rachel had never taught her, but which seemed to emerge naturally as Sophia's gifts developed. The ceremony began with Morrison speaking about the investigation's success. 23 convictions, including Cain's life sentence. 42 trafficking victims recovered. Financial assets seized and redirected towards survivor support. Legislation passed. Systems reformed. The pattern of institutional corruption disrupted, though Morrison acknowledged similar networks surely operated elsewhere, waiting to be exposed. Natalie spoke about Rachel, about the woman she'd never met but whose evidence had made everything possible. She held up the USB drive that had been hidden in a black crane, describing how a dying mother had protected her family and countless strangers through determination and strategic planning that extended beyond death. Daniel's turn came last. He'd prepared remarks but found himself departing from them, speaking instead to truths that had taken 5 years to fully understand. My wife died because she chose to fight rather than submit. She could have ignored what she discovered, could have prioritized our family's immediate safety over exposing a network that was destroying hundreds of lives. But that wasn't who Rachel was. She believed that character is what you do when nobody's watching. That real strength isn't what you can break, but what you choose to protect. He paused, finding Sophia in the audience beside Mrs. Harris. She taught our daughter those same values. Taught her that paper cranes are symbols of hope and protection. That rituals matter because they remind us what we're fighting for. that patterns exist in chaos, if you know how to see them. Sophia saved my life by trusting those patterns, by believing her mother's gifts extended beyond the grave. His gaze found Natalie, seeing the woman who'd become his wife 2 years ago in a small ceremony attended by survivors the foundation had helped. Rachel also taught me that love doesn't end when someone dies, that honoring the dead means living fully rather than freezing in grief. She gave me explicit permission to find love again, to build a family that includes both her memory and new futures she'd never see but would have celebrated. Daniel produced a photograph, displaying it on the screen behind him. The image showed the backyard of their brownstone, focusing on an old tree where 3 sets of initials had been carved. Rachel and I carved our initials in this tree when we bought our first apartment. After she died, I couldn't bring myself to touch it. 3 years later, when Natalie and I decided to get married, Sophia asked if we could add to it rather than erase it. So we did. The photograph showed the complete carving. RP plus DP equals forever on the top line, with NP plus DP plus SP equals family carved below. Forever doesn't mean unchanging. It means the love continues, the foundation holds, the pattern extends through generations. Rachel built something that survived her death and grew stronger through the people she touched. That's the real meaning of forever. The ceremony concluded with Sophia presenting origami cranes to survivors who'd completed the Foundation's residential program. Each crane was unique, folded with colors and patterns Sophia had chosen specifically for each recipient. The ritual had become tradition, her way of passing forward the protection Rachel had given her. Afterwards, Daniel stood in the community garden survivors tended behind the building. The space provided therapy through growing things, through nurturing life, in contrast to the trauma they'd survived. Natalie joined him, their hands finding each other with comfortable familiarity. Rachel would have loved this. All of it. Daniel nodded, feeling his first wife's presence in the work they'd built, in Sophia's gifts, in the survivors finding safety through resources Rachel's evidence had made possible. She's here. In every person we help, every system we reform, every time Sophia folds a crane and creates something protective from simple paper, the pattern she started continues. Mrs. Harris appeared, shooing them toward the reception where food waited, and survivors wanted to thank them personally. The elderly woman had revealed more of her history over 5 years, hints of a husband who'd worked intelligence operations and taught her skills most grandmothers never acquired. She maintained connections Daniel still didn't fully understand, but which had proven useful when foundation work required navigating bureaucracy or accessing resources through unofficial channels. Sophia stood at the reception center, surrounded by survivors who'd become her extended family. At 13, she'd found purpose in her enhanced perception, using gifts that might have become burden to instead provide exactly the kind of support trauma survivors needed. She could sense when someone needed space versus companionship, when tears meant healing versus crisis, when a trigger was about to activate before the survivor themselves recognized the signs. The foundation had become home for all of them. Daniel directed maintenance and construction, finally using his skills to build rather than merely repair. Natalie managed operations and funding, leveraging her family's connections toward redemptive purposes that addressed her father's historical failures. Mrs. Harris supervised kitchens and housing, somehow knowing exactly what each survivor needed before they could articulate it themselves. And Sophia, their extraordinary daughter, who carried Rachel's gifts and their own love, created protection through folded paper and enhanced perception that transcended normal human awareness. Daniel watched his family, biological and chosen, gathered in space built from tragedy and evidence and a dying woman's determination to make her death mean something. The pattern Rachel had started had indeed held, not through magic or supernatural intervention, but through the decidedly human qualities of courage, sacrifice, and love that extended beyond individual lifetimes. The black crane remained in Daniel's office at the foundation, displayed under glass beside Rachel's photograph. Sophia had repaired it after the assault, carefully restoring the folds while preserving the USB drive that had sparked everything. Visitors often asked about it, prompting stories about Rachel's investigation and the daughter who'd carried her mother's final message. But Daniel knew the crane's true significance transcended its role in exposing Cain's network. It represented something more fundamental about how love survived death, how mothers protected children through time and distance, how folded paper could carry meaning that transformed lives. The pattern complete, Rachel had promised through Sophia's certainty. Not ended, not finished, just complete in the way that foundations are complete before buildings rise from them. The way first chapters are complete before stories continue through volumes beyond. Daniel returned to the reception, joining Natalie and Sophia and Mrs. Harris and the survivors who'd become their extended family. Around them, the Rachel Porter Foundation hummed with life and purpose, protecting those who needed protection, offering hope to those who'd lost it, proving that patterns could hold even when everything seemed lost. The cranes continued their work, folded and distributed and carried into the world by people who believed that simple paper could protect. Maybe they were right. Maybe belief itself created protection, not through magic, but through the very human power of symbols to remind us what matters, what's worth fighting for, what survives when everything else is stripped away. Or maybe Rachel had known all along that the real protection came not from paper, but from love, from family, from the patterns we create through living fully despite tragedy, through choosing courage over surrender, through believing that our actions matter even when outcomes remain uncertain. The pattern held because they chose to trust it, and in that choice, they'd built something worth protecting, something that would extend beyond their own lives, carried forward by survivors who'd fold their own cranes, tell their own stories, create their own patterns from the foundation Rachel had provided. Forever, indeed.